The desert sun blazed mercilessly over the outpost, baking the sand to a brittle, almost glass-like state. A low wind carried grit into every crevice, scratching skin and sand-blinding eyes. Jason Cole, a Navy SEAL medic with years of deployments etched into his posture, moved along the perimeter with alert precision. He could feel the tension vibrating in the air, a weight that told him something catastrophic was about to happen. His instincts screamed. He had seen this rhythm before, the calm that precedes chaos. Then it came, louder and more violent than any prediction. An explosion erupted near the southern watchtower, throwing a column of fire and dust skyward. The ground quaked beneath Jason's boots, and the familiar scent of burning metal, earth, and human fear flooded the air. He vaulted over debris without thinking, hand instinctively gripping the strap of his medical kit. The first thing he noticed amid the chaos was the silence that shouldn't have been there. Screams, shouts, and alarms pierced the air, but one figure moved differently. Amid the smoke, a young woman contractor was sprawled on the sand, her leg mangled with shrapnel and deep gashes from steel fragments that had ripped through the flimsy protection of the outpost walls. Blood poured from her wound, soaking the tattered uniform she wore, yet her face remained eerily calm. Her chest rose and fell in measured rhythm, her breaths controlled. Jason froze for a fraction of a second, startled not by the severity of the injury, but by the unnatural composure she maintained. Most civilians under less extreme circumstances had already succumbed to panic, screaming for help, crying out in pain. She did neither. Jason dropped beside her, forcing his mind into the automatic sequences of treatment drilled into him through years of relentless practice. "Stay with me," he ordered, voice steady despite the adrenaline hammering his chest. He tore gauze from his kit, pressing it over the wound to stem the bleeding. Her eyes, deep, brown, unwavering, locked onto his. No fear, no pleading, just a cool observation that made Jason pause. He had seen elite soldiers crumble under worse. This quiet resolve unnerved him more than the mangled leg itself. "Do you feel any numbness, shock?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the clamminess of her skin and the firmness of her pulse. She shook her head slightly, a small gesture precise enough to indicate control without wasting energy. Jason's fingers worked furiously, tightening the bandage while checking circulation. Every instinct in his body screamed for him to inject morphine, to sedate, to stabilize. Yet she resisted, refusing the treatment he offered silently, shaking her head again. Jason's eyes narrowed. This wasn't defiance or ignorance. This was discipline. Around them, the outpost had become a war zone in miniature. Dust swirled like smoke from an inferno, sand whipping against skin, and the acrid tang of burnt electronics and scorched earth filled every breath. Men shouted over the chaos, trying to lift debris off trapped comrades. Explosions echoed like angry drumbeats, and the thrum of incoming helicopters reverberated through the sand. Jason worked against all of it, but he couldn't tear his eyes from the woman. Even in the presence of mortal danger, she maintained posture, her body angled perfectly to minimize blood loss. Every subtle movement indicated training, though it was the kind of training no ordinary civilian possessed. He pressed harder, gauze soaking through rapidly. "Hold still. I'm not going to let you." He cut himself off as she steadied herself against his shoulder with a slight nod, almost imperceptible, signaling not compliance, but readiness. Jason's mind raced, trying to categorize her. Contractor? Maybe ex-military? Perhaps intelligence? None of it fit neatly. He had never seen anyone civilian or soldier hold their body under trauma like this. There was a rhythm to her resilience, a precision that spoke of rigorous preparation and a hidden history. A second explosion rocked the perimeter, sending a nearby wall of sand tumbling over their position. Jason shielded her with his body, his own ears ringing, heart hammering in time with the tremor of the blast. Dust filled the air, and coughing soldiers stumbled past. Yet she didn't flinch beyond a slight tightening of her core muscles to brace for impact. Jason's breath hitched involuntarily. She wasn't frozen by fear, she was calculating, reacting in microseconds to a threat most trained operators would struggle to endure. He had treated SEALs, Rangers, Delta operators, men whose entire lives were forged in combat. She, however, had transcended their level of composure. Jason continued patching the wound, each movement careful and deliberate. His hands had to be faster than the desert's shifting chaos, but he found himself studying her, trying to read the unspoken commands her body issued. Her eyes followed him with almost clinical precision, assessing his every move, as if silently gauging whether he was competent enough to keep her alive. It was unnerving, yet it forced Jason into a state of absolute focus. He couldn't afford error, not on her, not on anyone, not with the enemy likely observing, waiting for another chance to strike. Her breath remained steady, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. Jason's mind briefly flicked to the basics of trauma response: tachycardia, shock, panic. She had all the signs of someone who should be in shock, pale and trembling. Yet none of it manifested. She leaned slightly into him, adjusting the bandage herself with tiny, precise movements that maximized pressure on the wound. Jason's eyebrows shot up. "You've done this before, haven't you?" he asked, half in disbelief, half rhetorical. Her lips pressed together, giving no answer, but the faintest flicker of acknowledgement crossed her eyes. Around them, the helicopter's rotor blades kicked up sand into swirling mini tornadoes, the pilot's voice crackling through the comms in sharp commands. Jason gritted his teeth against the grit that stung his eyes. He worked faster, knowing evacuation was imminent, yet every move of hers mirrored professional combat drills. He watched as she shifted her injured leg slightly, rolling her ankle inward to relieve pressure without jeopardizing circulation. He realized with a mix of awe and unease that she had trained for this exact moment, the unknown trauma, the extreme pain, the fear of helplessness, and she had won. Another SEAL ran past, yelling about reinforcements, about securing the perimeter. Jason hardly registered it. The woman Riley, as she had finally murmured when he asked her name, was the anomaly here. Most civilians in this scenario screamed, fainted, or froze. Riley did none of these. She manipulated her own blood flow, her breathing, her focus like a living algorithm designed to optimize survival under fire. Jason's hands moved in tandem with her subtle corrections, feeling like he was assisting a machine, yet she was flesh and blood, and shockingly human in her silent defiance. As the medevac helicopter landed, Jason helped her up. She refused the stretcher, keeping herself upright, despite the gash that should have made standing excruciating. Other soldiers struggled around them, shouting, leading, panting, and she maintained her composure with the unwavering calm of someone who had endured far more than anyone knew. Jason studied her face, half expecting a crack in the calm, a play for help, a sign of vulnerability. But she remained unreadable, almost impossibly still, every inch a controlled entity within chaos. He realized then that the night's mission had taught him more than battlefield medicine. It had revealed a kind of resilience he hadn't witnessed in his entire career. The rotor blades whirred louder, tossing sand into the blistering desert heat. Jason guided Riley carefully toward the open cargo bay, scanning for danger, but his attention kept returning to her silent strength. She glanced at him once, and for the briefest instant. The unflinching armor around her eyes softened, just enough to hint at trust. Just enough for Jason to understand. She didn't need saving in the conventional sense. She was surviving, and she expected him to do the same. In that moment, a medic and a mystery operative forged an unspoken bond, born of shared urgency and the quiet acknowledgement of exceptional capability. As they lifted off, the outpost shrinking below them, Jason finally allowed himself a deep exhale. Around him, screams and alarms continued, yet inside the helicopter, a strange calm had settled. Riley leaned against the wall, breathing in rhythm, eyes closed. The medic who had seen wars, disasters, and chaos could not shake the feeling that this woman, injured yet unbroken, had redefined resilience before his very eyes. And in the fleeting moments above the desert, Jason realized something terrifying and exhilarating. He had no idea who he had just treated, but he knew he had just witnessed someone extraordinary. The helicopter shook violently as it lifted off, the rotor blades slicing through the desert wind like furious knives. Sand and dust whipped against the canopy, stinging Jason's eyes and clinging to every exposed patch of skin. The roar of the engines drowned out almost everything, but he could still hear the faint cries of wounded soldiers and the frantic shouts of medics and operators back at the outpost. Yet above all that chaos, his focus remained fixed on Riley. She sat upright on the floor of the cargo bay, one leg wrapped in soaked gauze, the other tucked neatly beneath her. Despite the mangled flesh, the blood, and the dust covering her uniform, she maintained perfect posture. Her back straight, shoulders squared, chin level, every breath measured and controlled. He had seen SEALs collapse under less, yet here she was, a civilian contractor, or whatever she was, sitting like a statue carved from resolve itself. Jason tried to push aside the creeping admiration, focusing instead on the practical. Her vitals. "Riley," he shouted over the engine's roar, reaching for his med kit. "Your heart's racing faster than it should. We need to get fluids in, monitor blood loss, stabilize you." She glanced at him, eyes calm but unreadable, and shook her head. No morphine. No four. Not even a whispered complaint. Just a precise tilt of her hand, indicating that she wanted the bandage tighter instead. He froze for a moment, incredulous. He had treated soldiers who screamed at the pain, contractors who panicked and fainted, even hardened veterans who begged for sedation, but she refused all of it. Her silence wasn't fear. It wasn't stubbornness. It was deliberate control. Jason had no choice but to comply, adjusting the bandage with meticulous care while observing her subtle movements. She shifted slightly, positioning herself to relieve pressure, her injured leg moving almost imperceptibly to improve blood flow. Every tiny adjustment spoke of training that was far beyond civilian levels. "Where did you learn this?" Jason asked, his voice cracking slightly over the deafening noise. For a moment, he caught her eyes, and for the first time, he saw the faintest flicker of acknowledgement. She didn't answer, but the way she inhaled, aligned her posture, and flexed her muscles silently confirmed it. She had prepared for exactly this scenario, and she had survived it many times before. Jason's mind raced as he applied pressure to the wound. Who was she? CIA? Former Special Operations? Maybe even an off-the-books government contractor trained to handle extreme trauma. The problem was, he had no proof. He had never treated anyone this disciplined under fire, not even the most elite Navy SEALs or Delta operators. He had been in war zones, active combat, life-and-death situations dozens of times, and yet he found himself watching her in awe, almost afraid to move too quickly, afraid to disrupt the precise balance she maintained. The helicopter swayed, tilting slightly as a gust of wind hit. Jason's hands trembled only slightly as he secured the bandage, but his pulse raced with more than adrenaline. It was pure fascination. Around them, soldiers shouted, equipment rattled, and dust and smoke filtered through the open bay, but Riley remained a calm, unmoving island amid the storm. Every SEAL Jason had worked with for years had a breaking point. Every medic he knew had encountered patients beyond their control. She had neither. Jason's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden lurch of the helicopter. The rotors hit turbulence, throwing both of them off balance. Riley's body instinctively tensed and adjusted with almost imperceptible micro-movements that countered the helicopter's tilt. Her injured leg remained stable, blood-soaked gauze maintaining its place, as if the wound itself recognized her command. Jason's jaw went slack. He had trained for such situations himself, practiced balancing while under fire and providing aid, but he had never seen anyone do it with such fluid precision while injured. He leaned closer to monitor her breathing, noting the slow, deliberate rhythm that defied the chaos surrounding them. Most wounded people would have accelerated their respirations, the panic rising in time with blood loss. Not her. She inhaled, held, and exhaled in precise increments, using her diaphragm, her chest, and her shoulders to control oxygen intake. It was as though she had rehearsed pain down to the smallest variable. Jason recognized techniques from advanced SEAL survival training, blood flow management, breath control, muscle tension regulation. But she was not in any military program he knew. "You're trained," he muttered, more to himself than to her. His voice was lost in the roar of the engines. She finally looked at him, a faint spark of acknowledgement in her eyes, almost teasing. No words, just a controlled stare that communicated far more than a conversation could. Jason realized she was teaching him something without speaking, a lesson in composure, discipline, and the power of silent mastery. The helicopter banked, making a wide turn to avoid a sandstorm that had begun to creep across the horizon. Jason gritted his teeth, gripping the edge of the seat to keep his balance. Riley adjusted, leaning slightly against the wall, using the motion of the aircraft to support herself. Her injured leg bent carefully, then straightened with flawless timing, ensuring blood flow remained optimal. Jason stared, trying to take in every detail. He had learned in his training that resilience wasn't just about physical ability. It was about mental discipline, the capacity to withstand chaos without faltering. Riley embodied that principle perfectly. For the first time, Jason felt like he was the student, not the teacher. She didn't need him to save her in the conventional sense. She needed him to facilitate her methods, not interfere with them. He caught himself imagining what her history might be: rigorous government survival programs, clandestine escape and evasion training, perhaps even specialized medical knowledge that allowed her to manage trauma silently. None of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was that she had survived an explosion, stayed upright, and controlled her body with unshakable precision. The helicopter began its descent toward the field hospital. Jason prepared to relay vitals to the landing team, but his gaze kept returning to her. Riley's eyes scanned the approaching structure, calm yet alert, assessing threats and exits simultaneously. He noticed the faint sweat along her temples, evidence of exertion and injury, but her expression betrayed no suffering, no panic, only calculated awareness. Every SEAL Jason had worked with had moments of visible stress, of doubt, of fear. She had none. As the wheels touched down and the aircraft bounced over sand, Jason helped her to her feet. Despite the wound, despite exhaustion, she rose without hesitation, refusing the stretcher offered by the medics. He realized that in her mind, the helicopter ride was merely a continuation of survival, not a moment of vulnerability. She expected danger, she expected pain, and she managed both with absolute control. Jason's admiration grew into something deeper, a mixture of awe and unease. He had treated hundreds of wounded, but she was unlike anyone he had ever met. Finally, inside the field hospital, the chaos shifted from battlefield to triage. Doctors and nurses rushed, shouting instructions, applying tourniquets and IV lines to other injured personnel. Jason guided Riley toward a quiet corner, away from the cacophony, but she remained alert, observing everything around her with a calm detachment. "We'll need to sedate you for proper treatment," a doctor said. Riley's head shook. Again, no morphine. No sedation. No complaint. Just a small nod toward her leg, indicating readiness for him to continue working with her. Jason swallowed hard, realizing the depth of her self-discipline. She wasn't challenging the system, she was operating on a level beyond it. Every patient he had treated in his career had moments of resistance, fear, or unpredictability. Riley had none. She had transformed pain into a tool, chaos into information, and fear into focus. The lesson was clear, though unspoken. Survival was a choice, and she had chosen mastery. As the medical team began prepping her for more detailed care, Jason stepped back for a brief moment, scanning the room. He caught himself wondering, how had she ended up here? What had trained her to endure what no ordinary person could? And more importantly, how could he ever hope to match the composure she had displayed under fire, in the open desert, with blood running down her leg and death roaring around her? He didn't have answers, only questions and a profound respect for a woman who had rewritten the rules of survival in front of him. For the first time in years, Jason Cole, seasoned medic of elite SEAL teams, was speechless. The field hospital smelled of antiseptic, burnt metal, and fear, a familiar cocktail for Jason Cole, yet sharper in this temporary desert facility. Triage nurses moved in a flurry, shouting for medics, calling out patient vitals, rolling stretchers through narrow corridors. The walls, thin and beige, vibrated faintly under the constant hum of generators and the distant roar of helicopters coming and going. In the chaos, Jason guided Riley carefully through the controlled pandemonium, mindful of her blood loss, mindful of her dignity, and utterly fascinated by her composure. Riley's movements were fluid, precise, almost rehearsed. She accepted his support, but not without purpose, aligning her injured leg to minimize strain and maximize circulation. She navigated the narrow passageways without a misstep, despite her bleeding leg and the sand still clinging to her uniform. Most patients would have stumbled, clutched the nearest medic, or expressed fear. She didn't. Her body obeyed her mind with near-perfect synchronicity. Every micro-adjustment, a subtle demonstration of training Jason could barely begin to comprehend. Jason led her to a small treatment bay near the back of the facility, away from the frenetic swirl of screaming, crying, and moaning soldiers. He helped her onto a cot, his hands gentle but firm. "We need to stabilize you properly," he said, his voice low so as not to draw attention. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes locking on his with that unyielding calm, and shook her head once more. No sedation. No morphine. Nothing. She didn't flinch as a nurse approached with an IV line. Jason's heart raced, not from fear, but from awe. He had treated dozens of patients under extreme conditions. SEALs, Army Rangers, civilian contractors. They all had limits. Riley didn't seem to have any. Every breath she took, every adjustment of her body, was deliberate, measured, controlled. Her pulse, though elevated from blood loss and adrenaline, remained steady. Her breathing was methodical, each inhalation and exhalation optimized for oxygen intake and pain management. It was impossible. It was also hypnotic. The nurse hesitated, looking at Jason for guidance. He shook his head, silently signaling her to wait. Riley's gaze met his, unflinching and calculating. She wasn't afraid of the procedure. She was evaluating it, like a chess player assessing the board before each move. Jason felt both admiration and unease. Admiration for her discipline. Unease because he had never seen anyone operate at this level. She was more than capable. She was dangerous in the best possible way. "Riley," Jason said softly, "I need to know, how are you doing this?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, almost quizzical, as if to challenge the very premise of his question. She tilted her head, breathing in, exhaling slowly, and then gave a minuscule shrug. Not arrogance, not defiance, but pure, unspoken knowledge. Some lessons are learned in silence. Jason realized that she wasn't just surviving. She was observing, analyzing, and adapting every micro-expression. Every slight movement was part of a mental map she was constructing in real time. He knelt beside her, placing a hand lightly on her arm to check circulation. She didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she subtly adjusted her posture, transferring weight to uninjured muscles while keeping the wounded leg stable. Her control over her own body was breathtaking. Jason tried to recall any similar training he had received, any program that could explain this level of precision. He came up empty. Nothing he had experienced in the SEAL teams, nothing in advanced survival school, matched her composure. She was a living paradox, civilian, injured, yet utterly untouchable. Around them, the hospital continued its chaotic rhythm. A soldier screamed in pain as another medevac landed, the sound ricocheting through the walls. Machines beeped, alarms blared, and the smell of antiseptic mixed with dust and sweat. Yet Riley remained a silent island, her breathing steady, her eyes sharp, taking in every detail. Jason watched as she subtly flexed her core, the motion imperceptible to anyone else, but he caught it a technique for pain management, balancing shock and maintaining stability. She was performing advanced trauma control without assistance, without instruction, without a word. Jason's curiosity surged. "Riley," he whispered, leaning closer, "who taught you this?" Her eyes met his, wide, unblinking, yet unreadable. A hint of acknowledgement passed between them, but no words came. He realized she would tell him nothing unless she chose to. Her silence was not stubbornness, it was strategy, control. She was in command, even in a situation that would paralyze most trained operators. Jason's mind raced with possibilities. Government program, classified training, intelligence agency, but none of it mattered right now. She was alive, she was conscious, and she was untouchable in her own way. A doctor finally approached, insisting on sedation for a deeper examination. Riley's head shook imperceptibly, her eyes narrowing just enough to signal Jason to intervene. He caught the subtle language immediately. She didn't want to be sedated. Not because she feared the procedure, but because sedation would rob her of control. Her body had been trained to manage trauma precisely, to convert pain into data, to use her body as a tool for survival. Any interference might disrupt the balance she had achieved through instinct, discipline, or some hidden training he couldn't yet name. Jason held his hand over the doctor's, shaking his head. The woman didn't need saving in the conventional sense. She needed facilitation, guidance, and respect for her methods. He realized then that he was both the medic and the student. The silent teaching had begun. Watching her adapt her position, manage her pulse, and control her breathing, Jason understood that the human body was more resilient than textbooks could convey, and that some people trained it beyond ordinary comprehension. Minutes passed like hours as Jason monitored her. Her breathing remained slow, controlled. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in exits, supplies, and personnel movements with subtle precision. Even in the midst of chaos, Riley's mind was entirely alert. Jason noticed micro-adjustments in her posture, a slight tilt of the torso, a flex of the calf, a shift of her hands, each one designed to maintain circulation, reduce pain, and anticipate further injury. He had read about such techniques in classified manuals, but he had never witnessed them executed with this level of calm, precision, and focus. The medics worked on other patients, unaware of the silent battle being waged beside them. Jason finally allowed himself a moment to study Riley closely. She wasn't just controlling pain, she was absorbing information, calculating risk, and remaining ready for action. Her mind was a tactical instrument, honed to anticipate needs, minimize vulnerability, and optimize survival. Every subtle movement, every measured breath, every glance at her surroundings was evidence of training beyond ordinary military standards. Jason realized he was looking at someone who had survived more than this single explosion. She had survived herself. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Jason guided her through each step of treatment without breaking her rhythm, allowing her to maintain control while stabilizing her injury. She accepted every adjustment, every bandage, every check of circulation, but always on her terms. He felt a mix of awe and unease. Here was someone entirely in command of herself, under conditions that would cripple most men and most soldiers. She wasn't just surviving trauma, she was mastering it. As the sun set outside the hospital's thin walls, casting a harsh orange glow across the room, Jason felt a rare emotion: humility. He had treated the most elite soldiers, seen the worst injuries, and faced chaos in countless forms, yet Riley had rewritten the rules. She didn't just endure trauma, she transformed it into information, into control, into power. And she had done it silently, without complaint, without show, without fear. Jason glanced at her, still sitting upright on the cot, gauging the environment with the precision of a trained operator. She met his gaze briefly, a flicker of acknowledgement passing between them, then returned to her silent observation. He realized something profound. She had given him no answers, yet had taught him more than any lesson he had ever received in his career. She was a mystery, a force, and a master of her own body and mind. And in that moment, Jason Cole understood that he was no longer simply a medic. He was a witness to discipline, to control, to resilience beyond comprehension. He had been trained to save lives, but she had been trained to control them, including her own. And the lessons he had begun to absorb in silence were only the beginning. The field hospital hummed with unrelenting activity. The sounds of alarms, shouted orders, and distant helicopter blades blending into a chaotic symphony. Jason Cole moved alongside Riley, his gaze flicking constantly between her and the surrounding medics. Her injured leg was stabilized with soaked gauze, yet she refused any sedation, refusing to let anyone override her body's careful equilibrium. Every movement she made was deliberate, measured, and almost surgical in its precision. Jason found himself mesmerized. Riley adjusted her position on the cot, leaning slightly to one side, her spine perfectly aligned, her shoulders squared, and her hands resting lightly on her abdomen. Even in pain, she exuded control, as though every muscle had been trained to function independently yet harmoniously. Jason noted the way she subtly tensed her core to maintain blood flow to her injured leg. Her breathing remained steady, rhythmic, almost meditative, each inhale and exhale timed to minimize oxygen debt and pain. It was discipline at a level he had only seen in the most elite military programs. He crouched beside her, hands hovering, unsure whether to interfere. Every shift she made was calculated. One wrong touch could disrupt the balance she had meticulously maintained since the blast. Jason glanced at the attending doctor, who was preparing sedatives. "We need to calm her for proper treatment," the doctor said, urgency in his voice. Riley's eyes narrowed just slightly, and she shook her head. No sedation. No morphine. Nothing. Not because she lacked pain, but because she refused to surrender control. Jason understood instinctively. He had treated SEALs who collapsed under far less trauma, contractors who had panicked at minor injuries. Yet here was Riley, an unassuming civilian, managing herself with surgical precision. His mind raced with possibilities. Government program? Intelligence operative? Shadow-level special operations? None of it mattered. What mattered was her methodical mastery over her body, her mind, and the chaos around her. She had converted the trauma into data, each nerve signal and heartbeat, cataloged and controlled in real time. Minutes passed like hours. Jason monitored her vitals, noting the calm steadiness of her pulse and the deliberate depth of her breathing. He observed micro-adjustments, a subtle flex of her calf, a slight roll of her wrist, an almost imperceptible shift of her torso. Every motion was designed to reduce strain on her injured leg, maintain circulation, and minimize pain. He had read about such techniques in classified manuals, but this was different. She executed them instinctively, seamlessly, without conscious thought or instruction. Jason couldn't help but speak. "Riley, who trained you?" Her eyes flicked to him briefly, cool and unyielding. A small, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. A silent acknowledgement that she had indeed been trained, but she offered no words. Her silence was deliberate. Her training had taught her that words were unnecessary, when actions alone could communicate intent, resolve, and authority. Jason's pulse quickened. He had treated warriors, men and women trained for combat, yet Riley's mastery was beyond any protocol he had ever encountered. He continued to adjust her bandages, careful to respect her balance. She didn't flinch, didn't complain, but subtly guided him with tiny gestures, a shift of her hand, a tilt of her head, a barely perceptible motion that directed him without breaking the silent rhythm of her body. Jason felt as though he was dancing with a master, following steps he had never learned and struggling to keep pace. He marveled at her focus, realizing that in her mind, chaos was just another variable to control, just another set of calculations she had already accounted for. Outside the cot's small perimeter, the hospital continued its frenetic pace. A medic yelled for in 4 line, another soldier screamed from a distant bay, and the hum of distant helicopters vibrated through the floor. Yet Riley's presence created a bubble of calm, a silence within the storm. Jason observed her scanning the environment, noting exits, personnel, and equipment with micro-adjustments to posture and tension. She wasn't just surviving trauma, she was surveying, analyzing, and preparing, anticipating potential threats and opportunities as she had learned to do countless times before. Jason crouched lower, monitoring her leg's circulation, while fighting the urge to be amazed openly. "You've done this before, haven't you?" he asked quietly, almost rhetorically. Her eyes locked on his, unblinking, unyielding, but for a fleeting moment, he caught the ghost of a smirk. No words, no explanation. She didn't need to speak. Her silence was as communicative as any conversation. Jason realized she wasn't defying him. She was teaching him something he hadn't been taught in all his years of combat medicine, that mastery of oneself was more powerful than any medication, any protocol, any brute force. She shifted slightly, adjusting her injured leg without any visible effort. Jason's eyes widened as he noted the subtle technique, a combination of core engagement, pressure redistribution, and micromuscle flexes that would have taken a trained SEAL months of practice to perfect. And she was doing it injured, without instruction, and without hesitation. He felt both awe and unease. This was no ordinary civilian. This was someone who had endured and survived in ways he could barely comprehend. Someone whose training had transformed pain into information, chaos into clarity. "Do you want to tell me?" he whispered, leaning closer. Her eyes flicked to his again, just for a moment. A faint acknowledgement. Not a yes, not a no, just recognition. Jason realized then that whatever she had been trained to endure, it had been drilled into her mind so deeply that words were unnecessary. She didn't need to explain. She didn't need to justify. She simply existed as proof of her own mastery. Time passed slowly. Jason guided her through the rest of the bandaging, monitoring every subtle change in muscle tension, breathing, and pulse. He could feel the rhythm of her survival, a silent music of nerves and breath that he had never witnessed in anyone outside the most extreme military training. Around them, the hospital operated at full chaos, yet Riley remained an island of control. Each breath, each tiny movement, was deliberate. Pain did not dominate her. Fear did not dominate her. Only calculation, only control. Finally, after what felt like an eternity compressed into an hour, Jason stepped back and studied her. She had stabilized herself, managed her trauma with unparalleled precision, and survived an environment that would have destroyed almost anyone else physically, mentally, or emotionally. He had saved her body, but she had saved herself, and in the process, silently taught him a lesson that would linger long after the dust settled. Jason's eyes met hers one last time before he left to check other patients. In that glance, he recognized something profound. She had endured and mastered pain in a way that defied logic, training, and expectation. She was no ordinary operative, contractor, or soldier. She was a living testament to the limits of human resilience, refined through hidden elite-level training that remained a mystery even to him. And he knew that whatever had brought her to this point, whatever had forged her into a being capable of such calm, he had only glimpsed the surface. Riley's silence remained unbroken. She allowed the medics to prepare her for further treatment, guiding each movement with subtle cues, never uttering a word, never showing weakness, never letting the chaos around her penetrate the fortress she had built inside herself. Jason stepped back again, feeling the weight of what he had witnessed. A living enigma who had survived a violent blast, managed her own trauma, and remained untouchable under conditions that would have destroyed even the most elite soldiers. As night fell outside the field hospital, casting the facility in harsh shadows and flickering fluorescent lights, Jason returned to her side. She was calm, breathing slow and steady, eyes scanning the room as if cataloging every threat and opportunity simultaneously. He realized then that he was no longer just a medic treating a wounded patient. He was a witness to something extraordinary. She had rewritten the rules of survival before his eyes, and the story was far from over. The morning sun poured harsh, pale light through the thin, canvas walls of the field hospital, casting long shadows across the sand-streaked floor. Jason Cole arrived early, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a renewed sense of curiosity. The previous night had left him restless, haunted by Riley's uncanny composure and the silent mastery she had demonstrated under fire. Other medics moved quickly, tending to new arrivals, checking vitals, and preparing the facility for the day's chaos. But Jason's attention was fixed entirely on her. Riley sat on the edge of the cot, her injured legs slightly bent, the bandages still heavy with dried blood. She moved carefully but deliberately, rising with a fluidity that belied both pain and exhaustion. Each step was precise, controlled, as though her body was calculating angles, weight distribution, and blood flow. She refused crutches, instead adjusting her gait subtly, letting her muscles take over in a seamless, silent choreography. Jason's jaw tightened. He had trained in advanced trauma and combat medicine, treated SEALs and elite operators, but he had never seen anyone move with such precise control while wounded. "Good morning," he said softly, careful not to startle her. She glanced up, eyes sharp, evaluating him with a calm awareness that sent a chill down his spine. "Morning," she replied, her voice steady but faintly strained. There was no hint of weakness, no desperation, only quiet determination. Jason noticed how she subtly shifted her injured leg again, micro-adjustments he would later recognize as a combination of pain management, circulation control, and anticipation of further physical stress. It was an instinct born of rigorous, possibly classified training. "Sit," Jason instructed gently, pointing to a chair beside her cot. She complied with an almost imperceptible nod, settling into the seat while maintaining perfect posture. Even now, despite the trauma and exhaustion, her composure remained absolute. He placed his medical kit on the floor and began routine checks, starting with vitals. Pulse steady, breathing controlled, temperature normal, though faint traces of dehydration lingered. Blood pressure slightly elevated, but within a range that could be expected given recent injuries. "You've healed remarkably fast," he noted, his voice tinged with genuine astonishment. Most patients with these injuries would be struggling for weeks, even months. She tilted her head slightly, acknowledging the comment without elaboration. Her focus remained outward, scanning the room, cataloging people, supplies, exits, and even potential threats with subtle eye movements that Jason could almost, but not entirely, detect. He realized she was still assessing her environment, still calculating, still training herself to survive beyond immediate medical concerns. Jason paused, letting her rest, and watched as she performed small, almost imperceptible exercises, flexing her toes, contracting her calves, adjusting her posture, subtly engaging core muscles. Each movement was deliberate, calculated to prevent atrophy, maintain circulation, and strengthen her body despite injury. He recognized the hallmarks of military-grade resilience and advanced trauma training, but she was doing it alone, without instruction, without assistance. She had internalized her training so deeply that it had become second nature, almost instinctual. Unable to contain his curiosity any longer, Jason asked, "Riley, what kind of training did you have?" "It's unlike anything I've seen." Her eyes met his, steady and unreadable. For a moment, he thought he caught the faintest spark of amusement, as though she was aware of his astonishment. Then, just as quickly, the expression disappeared. "Not conventional," she said quietly, almost dismissively. That one phrase sparked 1,000 questions in Jason's mind, none of which he dared voice aloud. He remembered the explosion, the helicopter flight, her calm under fire, the micro-adjustments she had made during every step. Every detail of her behavior pointed to a hidden extreme level of preparation. Not conventional, didn't even begin to describe it. She was operating on a level beyond what even the most elite operators achieved. He realized he was dealing with a living enigma, someone whose past, training, and resilience were shrouded in deliberate mystery. Riley adjusted her injured leg again, a subtle twist and flex that kept blood flowing without causing discomfort. Jason noted the faint lines of exertion across her face, the tightness in her jaw, but also the unyielding focus in her eyes. Most patients would have been whining, groaning, or expressing frustration by now. She had neither. Her silence was deliberate, a tool she wielded to maintain control over her environment and herself. Jason felt both admiration and unease. He was witnessing someone who had survived extreme trauma in ways that challenged his entire understanding of resilience. Hours passed as he monitored her, each moment revealing more of her extraordinary discipline. She didn't require prompts for hydration, nutrition, or rest. She managed her body with a precision that bordered on surgical. He watched her practice micro-movements to maintain flexibility and circulation, subtle breathing techniques to reduce pain and stress, and tiny postural shifts to protect her injured leg. She had turned recovery into a science, a methodical regimen executed silently, efficiently, and without complaint. During a brief lull, Jason dared to ask, "Riley, have you been in the military?" Her eyes flicked to him, narrowing just slightly. She shook her head. "No, not in the conventional sense," she replied, her tone measured. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Then how?" She held up a hand subtly, signaling him to wait. He stopped mid-sentence. There was a deliberate patience in her actions, a way of controlling the conversation that mirrored how she controlled her body. Jason leaned back, watching as she subtly practiced postural exercises, tiny stretches, and breath control. He realized that whatever training she had undergone, it wasn't just about survival, it was about mastery of herself. She had internalized techniques that allowed her to regulate circulation, pain perception, muscle tension, and oxygen intake with a precision that seemed impossible. She was recovering faster than anyone should be capable of, and she was doing it entirely on her own terms. "Do you ever tell anyone what you've done?" Jason asked carefully. She shook her head again. Her silence spoke volumes. She shared only when she chose to, and only with those she deemed worthy. Jason felt a strange mixture of frustration and awe. Here was a woman, barely a civilian in appearance, who had survived a battlefield explosion, managed her injuries with surgical precision, and remained an untouchable presence in a chaotic hospital. And she revealed nothing of herself, not yet. The day wore on. Jason guided her through routine checks while keeping a respectful distance, allowing her to maintain her rhythm. Each movement, each breath, each glance was calculated. She remained vigilant, her eyes constantly scanning, cataloging, and calculating. He noticed subtle ways. She was training herself even in recovery micromuscle exercises, controlled breathing, and slight positional shifts that protected her injured leg while maintaining blood flow. Every detail reinforced the same truth. Riley was not ordinary. She was a product of extreme, perhaps classified, training. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting orange and gold shadows across the field hospital, Jason finally allowed himself to speak plainly. "Riley, I've treated the best. SEALs, Rangers, even Delta operators. I've never seen anyone do what you're doing. How did you survive that explosion with such control?" Her eyes met his, steady, unyielding. For a brief instant, the faintest smile flickered. Then it was gone. She didn't answer, but Jason could sense the silent message. She had been trained to endure, to survive, and to master herself, and no explanation was necessary. For the rest of the evening, Jason continued monitoring her, fascinated and humbled. She moved with careful precision, ate lightly, and adjusted her posture in ways that preserved strength and circulation. Her injured leg remained stable, but her body and mind radiated an almost otherworldly calm. Jason realized he was no longer just a medic treating a patient. He was witnessing a living lesson in resilience, control, and the power of silent mastery. And he understood, without words, that her story was far from fully revealed. The field hospital settled into a quiet rhythm as evening shadows stretched across the sand outside. Jason Cole had stayed close to Riley throughout the day, monitoring her vitals, noting her precise movements, and marveling at her unshakable composure. Other medics had long since moved on to new patients, but Jason remained, drawn by a mixture of professional responsibility and deep fascination. She wasn't just recovering, she was actively demonstrating the kind of mastery over trauma he had only read about in classified manuals. Riley shifted slightly on the cot, adjusting her injured leg with a small, deliberate twist. Jason watched her, noting how she subtly flexed her quadriceps and calves, a micro-movement almost imperceptible, but enough to maintain circulation and prevent stiffness. She wasn't merely surviving injury. She was orchestrating her own recovery with the precision of a seasoned operative. Every adjustment was a silent statement. She was in control, entirely. "You're remarkable," Jason said quietly, almost to himself. She glanced at him, her eyes cool and unflinching. "Remarkable?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Her tone was neither boastful nor defensive, merely observant. Jason nodded, feeling the weight of his own words. "You survived a battlefield explosion, managed your injuries flawlessly, and you don't even seem human. I've treated elite operators who would have collapsed in your situation." She gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a subtle acknowledgement that she understood without needing to speak further. Jason studied her carefully. There were clues scattered throughout her behavior, small telltale signs that spoke of extraordinary training. The way she shifted her weight to optimize blood flow, the controlled contraction of her core muscles, her deliberate, measured breathing, these were techniques taught in survival programs for the most elite forces. Yet she had executed them instinctively, without guidance. Someone had trained her beyond what most operatives experienced, and he realized he was only seeing fragments of that preparation. "Riley," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "I need to know. You weren't just trained for survival, were you? You were trained to endure. More than most people can even imagine." Her eyes met his, steady and unwavering. For a moment, he thought he saw something flicker behind them, a memory, perhaps, or a shadow of recognition, but she said nothing. She let silence speak instead, a tactic as deliberate as her movements. Jason leaned back slightly, watching her adjust her posture again, micro-shifting her injured leg to prevent pain while maintaining blood flow. He realized that every decision she made was calculated. Every muscle contraction, every measured breath, every tilt of her body was an act of precision. The kind of control that takes years of training and conditioning to master. He had treated operators who had trained for decades and still struggled to maintain composure under stress. Yet she did it naturally, instinctively. "I think," he began, hesitating as he searched for the right words. "I think you've been through more than I can even guess. Not just training, real missions, real combat. You're built differently." She tilted her head slightly, just enough for him to see the faintest acknowledgement in her eyes. Jason realized that she was confirming his suspicions without speaking outright, letting him piece together the story in his own mind. As the evening deepened, Jason watched her continue her subtle exercises, micro-flexes of the injured leg, slight rotations of the wrist, small contractions of the abdominal muscles. Each movement was designed to preserve function, maintain circulation, and control pain. She had transformed recovery into a precise science, a silent performance of discipline and endurance. Jason felt both admiration and unease. He had seen remarkable people in his career, but none like her. She was beyond remarkable. She was an enigma. Finally, unable to resist, he asked, "Riley, did you train with the military? Intelligence? Special operations?" Her eyes met his again, unwavering, and she gave a slow, deliberate shake of her head. "Not exactly," she said softly. The words were cryptic, almost dismissive, yet they carried weight. Jason felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting in his mind. Her training was real, extreme, and life-altering, but it was not part of any conventional program. It was personal, hidden, forged in secrecy. Riley's gaze shifted toward the far corner of the field hospital, where another medic was tending to a new arrival. Jason followed her eyes and saw the subtle calculations she was making, assessing space, evaluating equipment, noting personnel movements, all without moving from her cot. He realized she had not only survived trauma, but had cultivated situational awareness to an almost supernatural level. Every micro-movement of her body was mirrored by micro-calculations of her environment. She had been trained to dominate chaos silently. Jason swallowed hard. "Riley, you're telling me nothing, and yet you're teaching me everything," he said quietly. She turned her head slightly, giving him a look that was both enigmatic and commanding. It was the kind of look that said, "Watch, learn, survive, but do not presume to understand fully." He understood then that her silence was a weapon, a teaching tool, and a shield all at once. Hours passed as they continued this silent exchange. Jason observed every detail, the faint twitch of a calf muscle, the micro-adjustment of her back, the way her fingers lightly flexed to maintain grip and dexterity. She was practicing recovery techniques, maintaining circulation, and preparing herself mentally for anything the future might hold. It was a level of control he had only read about in advanced manuals, never seen applied so perfectly in the field. As night fell and the hospital dimmed, Jason finally allowed himself a thought he had been pushing down for hours. Riley was extraordinary. She had survived an explosion, controlled her body under extreme pain, and displayed resilience beyond any standard military or civilian expectation. And yet, there was more, something hidden, something personal, that explained why she had reached this level of mastery. He didn't know what it was, but he knew that discovering it would be both essential and dangerous. Riley shifted slightly on the cot again, micro-adjusting her position for comfort and circulation. Jason noticed a faint, practiced exhale, a release of tension she had held even in calm moments. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. She was human. Pain, fatigue, and stress existed for her, but she had trained herself to process them silently, to convert them into information rather than suffering. Jason realized that he was witnessing a level of self-mastery he had never thought possible outside of highly classified programs. Finally, as he prepared to leave her side for a brief moment, he spoke again. "Riley, I don't know what you've been through, or how you survived, but I want you to know, you've already taught me more than anyone else in my career." She turned her eyes on him, steady, unreadable, and for the first time, he thought he saw a shadow of something: approval, perhaps, or acknowledgement. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Jason stepped back, taking a quiet breath, and realized something profound. He was no longer just a medic treating a patient. He was a witness to extraordinary resilience, a student in a silent classroom where the teacher refused to speak. Riley's mastery of body, mind, and environment had not only ensured her survival, but had rewritten the rules of trauma recovery and self-control in front of him. And he knew without doubt that her story was far from fully told. As the night deepened and the hospital quieted, Jason continued to watch over her, a silent guardian to a living enigma. Riley had endured, survived, and mastered trauma beyond comprehension, and the lessons she imparted through silence, precision, and subtle demonstration would stay with him forever. He understood then that he had only glimpsed the surface of her extraordinary life, a life forged in secrecy, discipline, and a mastery of self that few could ever imagine. The desert wind rattled the field hospital walls, carrying the faint scent of sand and smoke from distant skirmishes. Jason Cole had spent the night watching Riley, observing her breathing, posture, and subtle movements. Even after hours of monitoring, he was still in awe. She had stabilized her injury without medication, maintained a calm composure in chaos, and demonstrated a level of discipline beyond any operator he had treated. But the question that burned in his mind had shifted from how to why. Who was she really, and how had she come to survive and excel under such impossible conditions? Morning light spilled through the canvas walls, illuminating Riley as she sat on her cot, practicing subtle exercises with micro-adjustments of her injured leg and core. Jason moved closer, carrying a tray with water and a light meal. "Riley," he began gently, "I think it's time you told me a little something. Anything about where this skill comes from." Her eyes met his, steady, unwavering, yet for the first time there was a faint shadow of emotion flickering in her gaze. She set her water down carefully, shifting her posture with precise control, and spoke softly. "I wasn't trained to survive. I was trained to endure, to adapt, to operate when everything else fails." Jason's eyebrows rose. "Endure? Adapt? Operate?" He leaned in, his curiosity impossible to contain. "You're talking about combat training, intelligence, survival techniques?" Riley gave a slow, deliberate nod. All of that. But more, much more. I was taught not only to survive the chaos around me, but to master the chaos inside me first. Jason studied her carefully. Every word, every movement, every measured breath revealed hints of her extraordinary past. She spoke as though experience was second nature, like an operative recounting decades of classified missions in a calm, controlled manner. And yet, something in her tone suggested this was deeply personal. She hadn't just endured combat. She had endured her own transformation, her own forging under conditions designed to break anyone weaker than her. She continued, "When I was younger, I was part of a program. Off the books. Not officially military, not intelligence, something that doesn't exist in any directory. They trained us in survival, evasion, advanced combat medicine, and situational awareness. But the real lesson, the one that mattered, was self-mastery. Control your fear, control your body, control your mind. Control everything, or you will be broken." Her eyes were calm, but Jason could feel the weight behind her words. Jason leaned back, absorbing every detail. It made sense: her ability to regulate blood flow, her micro-adjustments to circulation, her precise breathing and muscle engagement, even her ability to read the environment silently. All of it pointed to training beyond conventional limits. "So all of this, what you've shown me, it's part of that training?" he asked. Riley's lips curved faintly, almost imperceptibly. "Yes, but not everything I do is taught. Some of it I discovered myself. Pain, fear, chaos, they become lessons if you let them. You learn faster when you endure fully." Jason's mind raced as he pieced together her extraordinary skill set. Not only had she survived a battlefield explosion, but she had done so by applying techniques that were far beyond the scope of any ordinary human training. Her ability to balance circulation, manage pain, and maintain composure was extraordinary. Her situational awareness and micro-adjustments demonstrated a mastery of her body that few could hope to achieve. He realized he was standing in front of a human who had been forged in secrecy, discipline, and extreme endurance. Riley shifted again, demonstrating subtle postural adjustments that allowed her injured leg to bear weight without causing strain. "You see?" she said quietly. "Even now, I'm practicing. Every movement is deliberate. Every breath is intentional. Every thought is a tool. You can survive by chance, or you can endure by design. I choose design." Jason nodded, the magnitude of what he was witnessing sinking in. This wasn't just survival, it was an art form. A discipline that few could comprehend, let alone replicate. Jason couldn't help but ask, "All this? It's incredible. But why hide it? Why operate in silence? Why not tell anyone?" Riley's eyes met his, unwavering. "Silence is a weapon," she said softly. "It protects you, it teaches those who watch, and it ensures control. Words are slow. Actions are immediate. I let the chaos speak for itself. I let the outcome reveal the truth, not the story." Jason realized she wasn't being evasive. She was demonstrating the principle she had mastered: control. Every word, every pause, every gesture reinforced the lesson of self-mastery she lived by. The day wore on, and Riley continued to recover, demonstrating her elite-level training through subtle exercises and silent control. Jason helped when necessary, but mostly he watched, learning lessons he had never been taught. She flexed, adjusted, and shifted, maintaining circulation, preventing stiffness, and controlling pain without assistance. Every motion, no matter how small, was deliberate, precise, and efficient. Jason realized he was no longer just a medic treating a patient. He was a student of an extraordinary master. Finally, as the sun dipped behind distant dunes, Casting a golden glow across the hospital floor, Riley stood, moving carefully but with astonishing precision. She walked without assistance, her injured leg carrying her almost flawlessly. Jason followed closely, heart racing with admiration and awe. "You've taken everything I've taught you and gone beyond it," he said quietly. She glanced at him briefly, eyes steady. "I don't need what you teach. I adapt what I already know." Jason paused, understanding fully for the first time the extent of her abilities. She was not just trained. She was transformed. Pain, fear, chaos. She had endured all, mastered all, and emerged stronger, faster, and more resilient. He realized that this was the culmination of her life's work. Not survival alone, but dominance over every variable she could control, and composure in the chaos she could not. As night fell completely, Riley sat again on her cot, breathing steady, posture perfect. Jason watched her silently, knowing he had only glimpsed fragments of her story. She had revealed just enough to understand her extraordinary skills, but not enough to know her fully. He understood then that she had been shaped by a life of secrecy, extreme training, and silent mastery skills that allowed her not only to survive, but to thrive where others would falter. Jason realized something fundamental. He was no longer just a medic or observer. He was a witness to a human operating at a level few could ever reach. Riley had survived an explosion, maintained control under extreme pain, recovered with precision, and demonstrated skills that surpassed even elite operators. Her story was still unfolding, and the lessons she imparted through silence, precision, and extraordinary discipline would leave a lasting mark on him. And in that moment, Jason understood one final truth. Riley wasn't just a survivor. She was a master of herself, a living embodiment of resilience, and the most extraordinary human being he had ever encountered. The desert night had settled fully. The field hospital bathed in the pale glow of distant generators and moonlight filtering through canvas walls. Jason Cole sat beside Riley, his mind racing with the fragments of information she had shared over the past days. He had watched her survive trauma with surgical precision, control her breathing and circulation, and maintain composure under stress that would have crippled even elite operators. And yet, despite everything he had observed, the full scope of her story remained hidden. Riley turned her eyes toward him, steady and unflinching. "You want to know the full story," she said softly, almost as if reading his thoughts. Jason nodded, leaning forward. "I do. I need to understand. Not because I don't respect you, but because I can't stop thinking about it. I need to understand how you survived, and how you're capable of what I've seen." She paused for a long moment, letting her words settle. Then she began. "I was recruited young," she said quietly, her voice calm but carrying weight. "Not by any government, not officially. A private program, off the books. They sought children with potential mental acuity, physical resilience, adaptability. We were trained in survival, evasion, combat medicine, tactical awareness, and psychological endurance. But the real training, the one that mattered, was control, self-mastery, mastery of fear, pain, and chaos. Everything else followed from that." Jason listened intently, realizing that her calm demeanor, her micro-adjustments, and her precise recovery techniques were the culmination of years of extreme secret training. "So all the techniques I've seen, the controlled breathing, the muscle adjustments, the situational awareness, they're part of that program?" he asked. She nodded, eyes steady. "Yes, but some of it. I developed myself. Pain and chaos are lessons. You either endure them fully, or they break you. I chose to endure." Her story unfolded like a silent river of discipline and struggle. She had been subjected to controlled trauma scenarios, endurance tests, and survival simulations designed to push her beyond fear and pain. Each test had forced her to regulate her heart rate, circulation, and muscular control with precision. Each challenge had trained her mind to calculate, adapt, and anticipate, turning instinct into mastery. By the time she reached adulthood, she was a human finely tuned for survival, combat, and resilience beyond ordinary limits. Jason's mind raced, fitting together the pieces he had observed: her calm under fire, her ability to stabilize her own injuries, her precise situational awareness, and her uncanny adaptability. Every detail now made sense. All of this, it explains everything I've seen, he said quietly. But why be here? Why operate alone, in silence? Riley's eyes softened ever so slightly, a fleeting glimpse of humanity breaking through her disciplined exterior. Because control is personal. You can survive for others, but mastery is for yourself. Silence preserves that mastery. Chaos does not need words, it needs results. Jason nodded slowly, understanding more than he could articulate. Her life had been forged in secrecy, tested by trauma, and honed through discipline. She had survived far beyond ordinary human limits, and yet she had never revealed her full potential. Not to friends, not to operators, not even to him. Her mastery was complete, and she had chosen carefully how much of it to reveal. To demonstrate, Riley stood slowly, her body perfectly balanced despite the still healing injury. Jason watched as she performed a series of controlled exercises, subtle flexes, twists, and positional shifts, each one precise, deliberate, and efficient. Even the injured leg moved with purpose, supported by core engagement and micro-adjustments that redistributed weight seamlessly. Jason realized she wasn't just walking or stretching, she was performing a living demonstration of elite trauma control and survival mastery. Everything I do, every motion, every breath, every thought, is training, she said quietly. Even now, even here, I never stop practicing. Endurance, precision, awareness, they are my tools. My body is my instrument, my mind is the conductor. Jason felt a shiver of awe. He had seen warriors perform under fire, but none had this level of self-command. She was a master of herself, and by extension, of every environment she entered. Then she moved to a nearby wall, surveying the field hospital silently. With a swift, fluid motion, she analyzed exits, equipment, personnel, and even potential hazards. Her eyes flicked back to Jason, calm but intense. Situational awareness is survival, she said. Every environment can kill if you underestimate it. Every movement counts. Even injury can be managed if you know how to control your body and mind. Jason realized this was the culmination of everything he had observed over the past days. She was not just surviving, she was thriving in extreme conditions with surgical precision. Hours passed, and Jason continued to watch as Riley moved seamlessly, demonstrating her elite-level skills. She guided him subtly through recovery techniques, micro-adjustments, and breathing exercises that he realized could save lives in the field. Her training was practical, adaptable, and lethal if necessary. But she used it with discipline, not recklessness, demonstrating a profound understanding of responsibility that matched her physical mastery. Finally, as the night deepened, Jason spoke softly, his voice tinged with awe. Riley, you've shown me what resilience, control, and mastery look like. I've never seen anyone survive and recover like you. You're extraordinary. She met his gaze steadily, a faint, approving nod acknowledging the truth in his words. Extraordinary is not the goal, she said. Survival is. Mastery is a byproduct of survival. Control yourself, control the environment, and you endure. That's all there is. Jason felt the weight of her words settle over him. He had witnessed an extraordinary human being, someone forged by trauma, secrecy, and extreme discipline. He had learned more from her silent mastery than from years of medical training and battlefield experience. She had endured explosions, pain, and chaos, and emerged not just intact, but refined, disciplined, and untouchable. Riley finally sat on the edge of the cot, breathing steady, posture perfect. Jason joined her, feeling a profound respect, awe, and gratitude. He realized she had not only survived trauma, but transformed it into knowledge, control, and strength. Her past, her training, and her mastery had created someone who could endure anything and teach those who observed her how to do the same. In that quiet, moonlit moment, Jason understood fully what he had been witnessing all along. Riley wasn't just a survivor. She was a master of herself, a living testament to resilience, discipline, and the power of control. Her story, though partially hidden, had revealed a universal truth. Mastery begins with oneself, and survival is the ultimate lesson. As the desert night deepened, Jason felt a rare sense of peace. He had been a medic, a healer, and a witness to extraordinary human skill. But Riley had shown him something beyond survival, the transformative power of discipline, awareness, and silent mastery. And he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, the lessons she imparted, through example, precision, and control, would remain with him forever. Riley's gaze swept across the hospital, one last time, before she settled back on the cot. Jason watched her silently, understanding that her journey of mastery was far from over, but that he had been privileged to witness a living testament to human potential. She had endured explosions, injuries, and chaos, yet had emerged stronger, more focused, and more extraordinary than anyone he had ever encountered. And now, in that quiet desert field hospital, her story reached a point of clarity, revealing a life forged in secrecy, tested in chaos, and mastered through unparalleled discipline. Jason leaned back, his respect for her deeper than he could articulate. Riley, the enigma, the survivor, the master of herself, had not only endured the impossible, but had silently taught him the ultimate lesson. Mastery over oneself is the greatest form of survival, and resilience is forged in silence, discipline, and unwavering control.